So let's move to the Middle East. Egypt and the buffer, I guess, for aid is what we're talking about here.
No, not exactly.
Okay, so apologies.
No worries. It'd be interesting to hear if any of these climate conferences ever bring up the subject of the military-industrial complex effect on our environment, and I would almost guarantee that they don't. We can perhaps discuss that in extra. But anyway, back to Egypt. So I'm going to start with the very important visits that have taken place over the last week. First of all, CIA Director William J. Burns and Israeli intelligence chief David Barnes met Tuesday in Egypt to continue, that was the 13th of February, to continue negotiations for possible hostage release deal. Burns also met with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, with whom he discussed a possible ceasefire. So we have the CIA arriving on the 13th of February, and then in the last 2 days, we've seen Recep Erdoğan, the president of Turkey, arriving in Egypt for the first time in 10 years. They actually entered a stage of enmity, of course, when President Sisi, and it's spelt wrong in the Haaretz article of Sisi, overthrew the allegedly democratically elected President Morsi. So this was, to some degree, a fairly important meeting. But of course, it's centered around Gaza. Erdoğan is trying to get more influence over the negotiations. Egypt itself is in competition with Qatar over who will have the monopoly in managing efforts with Hamas to come to an agreement. But what's interesting here, now Egypt talks about its national security, which could come to pass the risk if masses of upwards of 1 million Gazans were to come across the border into Sinai, if and when, and of course Israel has actually begun the military operation, or certainly the bombing operation in Rafah in the far south on the border with Egypt. Now, that would impinge upon what is known as the Philadelphia Accord. The Philadelphia Accord was signed in September 2005, effectively gives Israel control of the territory in Rafah, in Egyptian Rafah on the border with Palestinian Rafah in Gaza, and is seen by Israel as an extension of the Camp David Accord signed in 1979 under the President of Sadat government, and was perceived as a betrayal of Palestinian national interests. But what's interesting, so we've had these two very influential meetings. Sorry, Mike, can I just go back for 1 second? And on Twitter, an organization called the Sinai Foundation for Human Rights, which interestingly, according to its Twitter account, is based in London, is talking about the building of a gated high security area on the border with the Gaza border fence on the Egyptian side. And then if we can move on, what they say in their tweet, the Sinai Foundation obtained information through a relevant source that indicates that construction work currently taking place in eastern Sinai is intended to create a high security, gated and isolated area near the borders with Gaza Strip in preparation for the reception of Palestinian refugees in the case of the mass exodus from Gaza Strip. So effectively, they're building what looks like another prison for Gazans already contained within an ever-diminishing prison. They have numerous articles on their website and the following video, which just shows basically the industrial bulldozers and the work that's going on next to the border. If we can just roll the video.
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, I can't verify this video, but it has been picked up now by numerous mainstream media outlets, and it does appear to, I do recognize the area. What it's showing, that areas that were already razed by Egypt to basically displace the Bedouin tribes that were living in Egyptian Rafah, that area is now being paved and leveled in preparation for what does appear to be, as shown on the next map, this kind of compound area, as you can see, right on the border, which is the red line with Gaza, and next to the Israeli-controlled Kerem Shalom crossing. Now, I mentioned it's been picked up by numerous mainstream media outlets that include CNN. Here, CNN show a Maxar Technologies image, which shows widespread bulldozing on the border with Gaza. And CNN goes on to basically describe very much the same as the Sinai Foundation. They're building Egypt is building a massive miles-wide buffer zone and wall along its border with southern Gaza. So if we move on and just go back to the Sinai Foundation report, now what's interesting here, they mentioned that who's in charge of this construction? The Sons of Sinai Construction and the construction company of the Al-Arjani Group, or the Organi Group as it's also spelled. Now, who heads up this organization? A guy called Ibrahim Al-Arjani. If we move on, we'll just see a nice picture of him, which is the header page of his Organi Group website. Who is Al-Arjani? Well, if we look at Egypt's monopoly on rebuilding Gaza, this is a report in Israeli media in 2021 in Haaretz. It serves both Israel and Hamas. And then if we look at the description of who is the main beneficiary of the reconstruction plan in 2021, is the company Beni Sinai, owned by Bedouin businessman Ibrahim Al-Arjani. But it also goes on to say that he cooperates with Egyptian intelligence in its war against the terrorist groups in the Sinai Peninsula. He owns some of the largest construction firms in Egypt, takes his orders from Egyptian intelligence, and also a big cut of Egypt's aid to Gaza and from the movement of goods from Egypt into Gaza, mostly those that pass through the Saladin checkpoint in Rafah. Now, what is also interesting is that he controls the Rafah crossing. The Rafah crossing is now charging $5,000 for every Palestinian adult to pass through the Rafah border into the safety of Egypt, and $2,500 per child, even if that child is injured. Now, the story of Egypt evicting Rafah residents to create this buffer zone goes back to, in fact, 2013. But this report is from 2014. And if you do a search on Google, you'll find multiple human rights reports on basically the destruction of Egyptian Rafah, potentially in preparation for what is now being described as another smaller open-air prison to receive Palestinian refugees. And also going back to the idea of the Philadelphia Agreement. So in other words, this territory would then be under the control of Israeli forces. So not only is Egypt potentially creating a secondary prison not on Palestinian land, but that prison would be under the control of Israeli forces. And then I just wanted to show a quick video of the existing border wall between. So this is between. There's actually two walls, and that strip that you see in the middle is basically what you have to cross when you go from Egyptian Rafah into Gaza. You can't go on foot because you'll be shot by the Israeli snipers that are in watchtowers along that wall. So already there is a degree of imprisonment by Egypt of the civilians of Gaza. And then I also wanted to just quickly show this video, which came out in the last week, of kids, starving kids, that have been displaced multiple times and are now in Rafah, to the furthest south of Gaza that was designated a safe zone by the Zionists. Now there are almost daily massacres of upwards of 100 Palestinians by the Israeli Air Force. So here the kids are actually begging Egypt to come in and save them, which is slightly ironic on the basis of the report I've just given. But if we can just play that video. So basically, it does appear as if Egypt is not only profiting from the imprisonment of Palestinians inside Gaza, but it is now enabling the Israelis to ethnically cleanse Gaza into another prison not on Palestinian territory.
Okay, Vanessa, thank you very much for that. Okay. We'll move